We are delighted to continue our partnership with the Center for Assessment. Their experts are here with us today. This is the second in this learning series, and it's really focused on how can state accountability systems really help support school improvement? Because ultimately, if you think about it, that's what this is all about, right? The whole genesis of assessments and accountability and how assessments feed into accountability systems is ultimately intended to help us all drive getting better at education systems, broadly getting better in states, at district level education systems getting better, at school-based education systems getting better. And so a lot of times there's this disconnect between, okay, well, here's all this accountability data and information, and how does it translate itself into really being useful? This is one of my key criteria whenever I talk about assessment and accountability. Usability. How does it really help us? And a lot of times we think about it helping us at a state policy level, but there are also ways that it can help us more specifically in terms of helping to drive school improvement. And that's going to be the topic of today's session. This is the second session. We've got two more sessions planned after this, one on August 17th. Again, that's going to start at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and one on September 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And there we're going to talk about some of the latest innovations in assessment, and as well as test fairness and accessibility. So we hope you have an enjoyable time today. This is a pretty informal, conversation. We've got a manageable number of people on the call, and so we invite you to sort of chime in, generously use the chat to either ask your questions or make reflections on what's going on in your state. To me, that's one of the most powerful parts of these engagements, is hearing what people are facing in their own board meetings in their own states. What are they hearing from their educators, superintendents, teachers, and so forth and so on. The Center for Assessment brings a very rich history working with state boards of education, working with policy leaders, working with the whole range of people in the education community in this particular area. No question is off the table. If you're like me, you need to be forward with those questions, because if their question is on your mind, you are not alone. There are others who have the same question, and so you do a great service to everybody if you go ahead and ask it. That's not too big, too small, too hard, or too uninformed. Questions are questions, and the more we can do to build people's understandings, the better off we all are going to be. So with that, I'm looking to Renee. Is there anything else by way of introduction I need to say? If not, I'm going to turn it over to the leader for today's presentation, Chris Domaleski. Chris, why don't you take it away?
Hey, welcome. Thank you for that great introduction. And I am going to share my screen, and I hope that you will see what I intend to display. Do folks see the slides in full presentation mode?
Yeah, it's great, Chris.
We do.
All right, fantastic. So performance task number 1 completed successfully here. As Paulo introduced, we're going to be talking about school accountability today, improving school accountability. So if you said, goodness, I hope on this Thursday afternoon I can talk about school accountability for an hour, or morning, or wherever you may be, your dreams have come true. We are very happy to be able to share this topic, which we think is really important and timely. I'm joined by my colleagues, Scott Marion, Carla Evans, and Catherine Gertz. I'll be primarily delivering remarks and facilitation, but I want you to know that others of my wonderful colleagues are here. And Paula said a bit about the Center for Assessment. I'll just maybe punctuate that a bit more and say we are a nonprofit. We're based in Dover, New Hampshire. We work with north of 35 states presently. I think every state at some point in our about 25-year history. On a range of assessment and accountability support topics. We're really interested in just helping states make strong decisions when it comes to design and validation of assessment and accountability systems that promote better outcomes for students. And then naturally, we're going to be leaning into accountability today. And what I hope to do with the time that we have allotted is talk very briefly about the purpose and promise of accountability, about ESSER requirement. I don't think I need to linger on that. But I'm happy to pursue particular points or questions you might have. I just want to make sure we start with a shared understanding. We'll sit back and some of the challenge of accountability. Then the primary focus of our time will be to talk about strategies that we think can promote improved accountability systems through the lens that Paulo introduced, which is really helping promote better outcomes for students. That's what it's all about. I want to let you know that the ideas in this paper are covered in a document, or excuse me, in this presentation are covered in a paper that my colleagues and I recently released. You see an image of the cover page there. So my colleagues Juan and Laura and Brian and Chris and I have just put together. So if you think, oh, we just got to touch on that lightly, I'd like to read more in depth about it, you'll find the paper at this link, and it's also at our website. And maybe Carla or Scott, if you haven't already, you could drop that into the chat so folks would have easy access to that resource. So let's try. I always like to start these conversations by making sure we're very closely tethered to the promise or the purpose or our best aspirations for accountability. And in many cases, accountability has it almost just has this negative connotation now. And I want to just start by returning to, what are our best ambitions for accountability? We want to signal what outcomes are valued, what goals that we want to prioritize. We want to provide information about the conditions and resources that affect school performance through accountability systems, and we want to report on progress on those prioritized outcomes. One of the things you'll hear me say is accountability systems are not one size fits all. There's not a gold standard for that. We believe strongly here at the center that thoughtful design of assessment and accountability is really driven by the principles and the priorities that you as board members would elevate. So when you say things like college readiness or really promoting continuous growth, and those are the things that we want to make sure are explicitly named and built into the design, and that we know that the features and mechanisms are well suited to promote those outcomes. We hope that accountability systems serve to clarify and promote those conditions for success. If not, they're going to fall short of their promise. And we're going to talk about some ideas that we have that we think can help move systems in that direction. I suspect many of you are familiar with the Every Student Succeeds Act. I wanted to just touch lightly on this just to make sure that some of the planks of ESSA that touch accountability are acknowledged today. You may know that ESSA has required classifications. They are these: comprehensive support and improvement, which must be no less than the lowest 5% of Title I schools or a high school that fails to graduate a third or more of its students. Targeted support improvement, there's considerable latitude for states to determine TSI, but those are going to be based on a subgroup that's consistently underperforming, and the way in which consistent underperformance is operationalized can vary. And then additional targeted support improvement. This one's fairly prescriptive in the law. The law requires that any school in which a subgroup of students on its own would lead to TSI identification falls into this category. In any school that is ATSI, that doesn't exit ATSI in a state-determined number of years, elevates to CSI status. These are the primary requirements of the law. And again, I'm happy to linger on any of these if that would be helpful for our discussion today. You might also know, or if not, I want to, by way of familiarizing you with the ESSA requirements, talk about the manner in which the law requires that states meaningfully differentiate school performance, and it must be based on these indicators. Academic achievement, and that's based at a minimum on English language arts and mathematics assessments, and it's tethered specifically to proficiency. Growth or another academic indicator. Almost every state has academic growth in the model, but there are two that I know of that use improvement instead of growth. Progress in achieving English language proficiency is a third of required indicators. The school quality student success, much has been written and discussed about this indicator, and we'll touch lightly on that today. And then, of course, graduation rate applies specifically to high schools. And one of the other provisions of the law that I want to acknowledge as we just do this very high-level overview is that all indicators in the aggregate must have a greater weight than the school quality student success indicator. So those are the primary features of ESSA. And actually, I'm going to just touch on one other thing, and then I want to pause for questions and comments because I want to make sure I don't talk at you. I really leave plenty of space for you to jump in with your questions and comments. But before I do that first very planned pause, I want to acknowledge out of the gate some of the challenges and critiques that we're hearing about accountability. Why do we elevate this as a topic? Why do we think it's timely and important? Well, partially because we're hearing a lot of feedback about accountability not delivering on the promise, accountability not moving in the direction that we hope that it could in the best case. So there is growing unrest with the status quo. And here are some of the things we're hearing at the center, some of the things you may be hearing in your positions as board members. That the systems are too narrow, that they're heavily influenced by proficiency in ELA and mathematics. There's a lot of other measures that matter, academic and otherwise, and it's time that we include those in systems in ways that reflect their importance to school effectiveness and to student improvement. We're saying that accountability systems aren't useful. You heard Paulo talk about that in his introductory remarks. In the worst case, they're complex, they're inscrutable, they're big Rube Goldberg machines that produce numbers that nobody knows what to do with. And so, folks are noticing the timing, the nature, the complexity of the systems aren't helping us help students. So that's another critique we often hear. Another critique is that they're unfair, that incentives are misaligned, the expectations aren't attainable. Some schools have the deck stacked against them, so that a system might advantage schools in some communities, but disadvantage schools in other communities. So that's a critique that comes up quite frequently in our conversations with state leaders about accountability systems. And finally, many have noted, we're just not seeing evidence that accountability is moving the needle in so many cases. And so really have to rediscover our commitment to effective systems and to strategies that are going to create more effective systems. So I'll keep us moving, and maybe we'll get into some of the specific ideas that we have for the path forward. And we start with guiding principles. This is the way I like to think about really prickly problems. When you encounter a problem that's tough to solve, one of the first ways I like to approach it is say, well, let's talk about what the earmarks, the characteristics, or the principles of promising solutions should be. And they are what you see here on the slide. As you heard me say earlier, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to accountability. It really need to approach this so that form follows function, that we connect system design and implementation to goals and priorities. Just like if we try to design an assessment to do everything well, it probably won't do anything very well. Accountability systems are similar. If we try to say this accountability system is going to do everything, including the kitchen sink, then we'll probably fall short and not as crisply pursue those goals as well as we'd like to. Measuring more of what matters, we believe states can go beyond academics, include a broader range of indicators that more fully capture the dimensions of school quality, but we have some caveats to that I will share when we get to that, because we're very humble about what it looks like to do that well. Reporting is just a start. I just say this straight away. One of the takeaways I'd love to leave you with is we think the theory of action that says just report outcomes about school performance and everybody will know what to do to improve them, we think that's an impoverished theory of action. We think that thoughtful design and implementation goes much further and really creates partnerships and mechanisms so that we really get at the conditions and the resources and the mechanisms to support improvement. And then lastly, process is essential. We found in our work here at the center, and I would want to highlight this as one of the takeaways, that including broad and diverse ranges of stakeholders in the design, implementation, and evaluation is just critical. When I started in this field about 20 years ago or so, I think it was assessment and accountability was much more the province of small groups of folks working in agencies to make these decisions. And one of the things I'm pleased to see is a movement towards including broad, diverse decision makers in the process. And we think that that's really essential. So here at the center, we talk a lot about theory of action for good reason. We think the foundation of any credible accountability system is really a well-explicated theory of action. It serves as a statement of the hypotheses for how the system is going to bring about the desired changes. If, for example, we think, hey, incentivizing and better resourcing advanced course taking is a mechanism for improving outcomes for students, then being clear about for whom and how and why and what things are necessary in order to support that well, all come with that commitment. And so those are the kinds of things that we would expect to see in a theory of action. Some people call these logic models, but laying clear what the claims are, what the assumptions and conditions to achieve those claims are really what a theory of action is about. It helps as a blueprint to guide design. We find often that there's going to be conflicts when it comes to design, and the theory of action can help resolve those conflicts. So one voice may say it's really important that the system is flexible and provides multiple ways to accomplish this. Somebody else may say, oh, but I want standardization. I want to be able to compare. And so resolving those tensions through a theory of action, we think, is advisable. And then I won't linger on this slide, but we have some ideas about the steps that one might take in developing a theory of action. Those are explained more fully in the paper that I referenced and in other papers that are referenced in our document. And so I just wanted to point to that as well. So let's talk about measuring more of what matters. This one's a tough one. I mentioned earlier that the school quality student success requirements, so you see those on the left side of this slide, that for all public schools, at least one indicator of school quality student success that allows for meaningful differentiation, is valid, reliable, and comparable. This one, if you look to the right, you see here's how many states have attempted to implement that. And you may see your state's system in here. And the reason they sum to more than 50 is because many states have more than one SQSS indicator. So we have 9 states that are doing school climate. On track refers to things like whether the credits achieved after, say, 9th or 10th grade are on track for a student to graduate in 4 years. We see just a few states working with discipline. College and career readiness by far is one of the more popular school quality student success indicators. We frequently see that operationalized through what I call menu approaches, where states will say, here are the accomplishments that we prize when it comes to achieving college and career readiness. It may be dual credit, AP courses, satisfying elements of the curriculum. In some cases, college states have reached beyond the K-12 and have gone and used things like college going rate as part of that indicator. Chronic absenteeism or attendance is another very common indicator. And in some cases, we see academic achievement outside of language arts and mathematics. So those are the things that we're seeing within ESSA plans. And I think there's a lot of room within ESSA to implement some of these ideas, and we can point to states where we've worked with that we think do that fairly well. But in other cases, states are looking beyond SQSS and asking, well, what are other things that we value that maybe even go beyond more academic measures? Like, I don't know, many people are using this term, but it was first coined by my colleague, Brian Dong, and I think it really fits. Trans-academic skills. You may think of things like social emotional learning, persistence, grit, creativity, those things that we value for our students to learn, but are very hard to measure and even harder to track in any kind of consequential way. There are some models for that. You see the Castle model in the graphic on the bottom left. And they're very widely publicized model for social emotional learning and their interactions. You see David Connolly's model on the right for the full dimension of college and career readiness. And what I want you to take away from that is it is so much more than academic achievement. It really involves helping equip students with college knowledge and the range of skills like study habits and time management and collaboration that go with being a successful college student. So we recognize, and I think increasingly leaders are recognizing, that these are very important, but they're hard to measure and they're hard to use in consequential ways. Particularly with the pandemic, we started talking more about opportunity to learn measures. So you might think where accountability systems have been heavily focused on outputs, we've seen more attention to inputs. And this would be something as straightforward as saying, do we have technology resources to deliver to that our students have access to? Do they have access to the supports and accessibility features that they need in order to access the curriculum and to show what they know on assessments? And what do we know about engagement beyond just chronic absenteeism? How are students getting involved in their education in and beyond the classroom? So all of these things have emerged and are growing in the conversation. But whenever I introduce this topic, I always like to say, be careful. Stakes matter. Campbell's Law is right here at our heels when we talk about this. And Campbell's Law is what you see in red here. The more we use an indicator for decision making in any kind of consequential way, the more we risk corruption pressures. And so we really have a tough needle to thread when it comes to both our regard for broad measures, but our sense of humility for what it looks like or what it might mean to include those in consequential accountability systems. And for that reason, we're finding, and we think this is a very reasonable conclusion, that many states are exploring strategies to collect, report, and support these outside of ESSA accountability. And that's a big theme I'd want to leave you with today, that ESSA alone may not accomplish everything that we want to accomplish when it comes to our ambitions for accountability. Doing things beyond ESSA, alongside ESSA, we think can amplify the effectiveness of the things that we care about for accountability. Sometimes in the circles that we operate in, we refer to that as little a versus big A accountability. Big A is that the federal system, the consequential accountability system that leads to that differentiation that I talked about a few slides ago, CSI, TSI, ATSI, and little a refers to initiatives to report and support. And I think it's very healthy for state leaders to think about how their role might fulfill one of those categories. Like, how can we be a research partner? How can we curate and share resources that are available to districts and schools? And all of that you might think of as part of little a accountability. So it's still serving some of our purposes and ambitions for accountability, but it's not, say, influencing a classification that goes to CSI. When it comes to utility, some of the ideas I wanted to share with you today, so making accountability work better, going beyond just reporting information and hoping people know how to use it well. I'll put a few of the ideas here on this slide. So first of all, we've seen tremendous improvements to reporting systems themselves, moving away from from static reporting to more dynamic data reporting tools that allows users to interact, say on your website, with a resource where you can disaggregate data, you can compare schools from different areas, where you can massage the data in ways that will help answer the important questions that the user may have. And one of the earmarks of having thoughtfully designed reporting systems, we think, is making sure that those are customized for different user groups, like parents, educators, and policymakers. Often, those groups approach data with different questions and have different needs. And so being thoughtful about how they're designed to meet those needs, we think, is another earmark of improving those reporting systems. Adding supplemental training and support resources is another dimension that we think can help with short-term movement to improvements here. And that's everything from things like technical manuals to interpretation guides, hands-on workshops and webinars. When I was with the State Department back more than 15 years ago, we spent a lot of time driving around to districts and schools, but that was before the ubiquity of webinars and Zoom. And so we're seeing states take advantage of their ability to interact much more flexibly and much more cost effectively, and be able to do hands-on training and support. One of the important principles of communication is that it's not just one way, that we see states really developing two-way streets to say, we're going to put information out there. We're going to be a partner with you to help you understand and use it well. And we've got all these mechanisms that hopefully work for you in the ways that help support just those things. Research and evaluation reports, I think this is an area we're seeing growing, and I love it. And I think where states say, how can we conduct some research? We're going to take a look at some practices, and we're going to take a look at data. We're going to share what we find. We're going to make that available because we want to make sure that we're right there with you, district and school leaders, and helping pursue the questions that we think are important and share our understandings and insights and provide ways for people to take advantage of that and use it well. And then finally, and this really is another way that we urge sort of movement beyond ESSA, is including information throughout the year. Just as summative assessments are often critiqued as having limited instructional utility because they come out at the end of the year, in many cases, after students have already left the building for the summer. Accountability, often those results are reported in the fall of the year after the results pertain to. And again, I'm very sympathetic to that. I work very closely with accountability directors. I know what's involved in doing that. And so there's a reason why it takes a while. But I think that's another reason why initiatives from states to put information out there throughout the year, doesn't have to be part of ESSA, is so very important through those dynamic reporting systems. We think that's another element to help make accountability work better. We think there's some leverage to differentiating systems as well. So there's limited ability within ESSA to do this, and I want to acknowledge that. I talked earlier about states can use some menu approaches for indicator. There's one example of that. So you may say, oh, there's more than one way you can show college readiness here at Main Street High School compared to Elm Street High School. But so you can show whether or not that's occurring through advanced course taking or through internships and career pathway accomplishments. So those kinds of things can be done within ESSA to some degree. The more technical term for that is disjunctive indicators, where doing one or some among a full list can satisfy an accomplishment. But then outside ESSA, if you're saying, well, that limitation is too constraining for me, what are some areas where innovation and where improvement could occur? Two ideas I would submit. One is district-specific systems that address the unique responsibilities and contributions that district make. Some people are surprised when I say ESSA says very, very little about district accountability. So that's really the province of states and districts for how they approach that. And a piece of guidance I would offer is that if your state does decide to pursue district-specific systems, think beyond just rolling up indicators and treating districts like super schools. Really think about what's the district's unique responsibilities and contributions to student success. Maybe it's curriculum, it's personnel, it's budget, and how can the systems be tailored to address those unique responsibilities and provide them the kind of support they need that may look very different than what you're doing in school accountability. Another example is alternative school systems. We've seen some states, Wyoming and Michigan come to mind straight away, that have put supplemental alternative school systems as part of their state accountability initiative. And it's really motivated by this idea that, hey, when we look at the high school accountability results every year, we often see that alternative schools are in that CSI list. And is our hypothesis that our alternative schools aren't demonstrating quality, or is our hypothesis that the model isn't well tuned to show the things that they're doing well? And some states are saying, we think the latter is more persuasive. We're going to try to provide something that's more customized and better suited to meet the needs of alternative schools. And that's just one example to how states are thinking about how to differentiate the systems in ways that really meet the needs of specialty schools. I'm almost done here, and then I'm hoping that we'll have some time for questions and some interaction. Building connections to school improvement. We think really building for reciprocity is very important. It's really guided by this statement by Richard Elmore. For every increment of performance I demand of you, I have an equal responsibility to provide the capacity to meet that expectation. And that's really something that goes back to the theory of action, that when states are designing for a particular outcome, that conversation is always accompanied by what are the conditions, what are the resources, what are they going to need to do that well, and how are we making sure that's addressed in the near and the longer term? And let's put that all in a comprehensive theory of action so that we don't lose track of it and we can monitor things as we go. Providing tools and supports that help schools and districts in planning and implementation. Some of these I signaled before, and I'll just allude to here again. Clarifying the criteria for effective practices, sharing resources, templates, guides, models, research. I know every state I work with always says, we're local control, and I believe it. I know you're local control, but within a local control mindset, I think it's still possible to say, hey, we're going to be at the state level a partner in helping collect and share resources. We're not going to compel you to use these resources. We're not going to grade you for using these resources. But we don't want to be coy about our attempts to try to put together as many good ideas and resources as we can and make them available to the field. And then I talked a little bit earlier about training sessions, taking advantage of opportunities for connections. I'm almost done here, and I said this at the start. I think this is a good place to come near a finish on. We think that how states make decisions about accountability can be as important as the decisions they make. And so we're really, really inspired by states that are doing great work in terms of putting together broad-based stakeholders, not just at the initial design phase, which is very important, but also have regular touch points with broad stakeholders from many different communities and areas that accountability touches to pursue innovation, build buy-in. And so, yeah, at that initial design and development stage, when determining what performance expectations are appropriate, by the way, that's an often overlooked aspect of accountability that I could do a whole separate session on and would love to do that. But what's good enough performance? Who decides and how does that get implemented? We think that's a great place for stakeholders to be involved in the process. We do the same thing with assessments. Why not for accountability? Handling exceptions. Those of you who may be very close to accountability know that exceptions take up an enormous amount of energy. What do we do with these schools that have unusual grade configurations? What do we do with a school that has missing data for one reason or another? So stakeholders can be partners in helping navigate some of those very tough decisions. And then different groups for different purposes. So technical advisory groups can help with, say, oh, we need advice on making decisions about how the growth model is implemented, but you may need policy or implementation committees that help with the questions about, is this data collection burden reasonable? Are we asking the right things in the right ways from the right people? So I think any of those touch points with the field really help improve the process of both design and implementation of the system and really can lay the groundwork for success. So I know I said a lot and I talked fast because I wanted to get through the material, but I would love to just open it broadly. I've seen some activity in the chat, but I haven't had an opportunity to scan it yet, so I'll do so while I'll wait a beat and see if you have some questions or comments. That's a great question. One state example that comes to mind straight away is our friends in Connecticut. I think Connecticut really amplified their ongoing data collection and reporting efforts during the pandemic when there was a hiatus in accountability, and they kept that going and then just continuously improved that. So they're sharing a lot of research. They've got some rich information on engagement, on resourcing. So I know the Connecticut State Department of Education is, we've got some colleagues there that we've co-presented with that we think are doing some very strong work there. So I would point to them as an example. I don't know, Scott or Carla, is there any that come to mind for you that you'd want to highlight?
No, I was thinking of Connecticut as well, and I put in the chat how they used the information they received from their accountability system, really from their assessments, to then direct funds towards particular types of grants within the state. But they also have like a research collaborative. I'll find that link as well, to share data with all the public universities in the state and really incentivize the types of questions that could be asked and that they're looking to be answered around all of their accountability and assessment information. So I'll find that link, but that was the example I thought of as well.
Okay, sorry.
Well, Louisiana does something very interesting too that I think is worth highlighting. Louisiana is one of those states that's sort of a partner in helping curate and provide advice about both curricular and assessment resources. You can go to their website, and they put these resources in like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They say like, hey, here at the state level, we're going to take a look at the resources. We're going to share our findings about how well suited they are to support the priorities that we have in our curriculum, in our content standards. And again, that doesn't compel anybody to do anything with it. It's just saying that we're spending some resources here at the state level to help provide guidance to the districts and to the schools about making good choices about the resources they select. I'm sorry, Scott, if I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that, one of the not such secrets about this is that accountability systems alone are not going to improve schools. And so it's the ones who connect best with support mechanisms and support systems. So, our friend Stephanie Johnson in Georgia is a real leader in support some of the district work, and also in Georgia, Gwinnett County Public Schools. But, when Paulo was a leader in Ohio, they had good connections with their support side. So accountability systems can't be designed only in the accountability office, because you're going to get something, but it has to be designed with the people who do school improvement and school support. So that's how you get these systems that work. And if they're done in isolation, then you just get labels.
Such a good question. We spent a lot of energy pursuing these kinds of questions. Let me share what I know. There's no magic wand here, but let me share kind of the thoughtful ways that I've seen folks approach this. So what you explained really elegantly and well is, there's this tension where technicians, and I'm probably going to describe myself as a technician, folks that work on the technical aspects of accountability and assessment systems. We want end sizes to be as high as possible because the results are going to be more reliable and more trustworthy. But taken to an extreme, you're going to remove a lot of groups, and in some cases even schools, from the system, and that works against equity. So, and nobody wants to do anything that works against equity. So if you really drop those end sizes down to very small numbers, then the results can bounce around a lot, and people will say, now we're worried that they're as trustworthy as they should be in order to make consequential decisions. So that's really just restating the problem that Carla put on the table for us. So often states start to approach this by saying, well, let's just understand what it looks like in our state and model this out. I don't know if the word street plot means anything to you, but we'll just look at like what would be the inclusion for each school and each student group at end sizes of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so forth. By the way, most states are at 20, some states are at 10, some states are at 30. 10 to 30 is the range in which about 90% of the states in the country are at. But looking at what the effects are, if we move our end size up to this, we're going to get this much more reliability, and we're going to lose this many schools or groups. And so at least that gives you the information you need in order to navigate. You might find in some cases that you can increase the end size and get that stability and not have much of an impact on inclusion. Or you may find that you can drop the end size and not have much of an impact on reliability and promote the inclusion. And by the way, the reason why I think it's important for every state to do it and why there's not just one document for this is that states are so different. What this looks like in states with very small schools like Alaska and Wyoming is very different than what this looks like in, say, New York or Illinois. And so doing that within the context of each state is very important. The other thing I'll just say, and again, it's going to be a little bit technical, but a lot of states are thinking about how they can bolster end sizes to promote inclusion through things like multi-year averaging. So they'll say if we're going to eliminate a school or a group because of end size, well, what if we use 2 years of data? Well, what if we use 3 years of data? And by the way, it doesn't have to be multi-year averaging. It can be multi-year combinations. We can say we're going to use year 1 at a certain weight, year 2 with a little less weight, year 3 with smaller weight still. So there's a lot of those kinds of alternatives, and these are things often that states will talk about with their technical advisory committees to explore solutions that might be more promising. But yeah, those are just 2 thoughts that come to mind. First is doing that very descriptive impact analysis of in-size for reliability and inclusion, and the second is exploring alternatives to augment the data through things like multi-year mechanisms. You make a good point. I'm going to answer it carefully because I'm not a policymaker or a politician here, but I'll answer it by saying I do think there are a lot of alternatives outside of consequential accountability that can move the needle towards improving outcomes for students. And so again, I called that earlier like the little a systems. And I think that both helps us deal with Campbell's law. It helps us move more nimbly. And so I think it's a very promising area. And none of that should be interpreted as a reluctance or a lack of support for more consequential accountability systems. But I think that there are meaningful and effective policy avenues in each area. Yeah, and thanks, Scott, for putting it in the chat. I think many of us sort of land on the same place, which is inclusion is very important, and we really need to consider how decisions bolster inclusion. Great question. It's all over the place. I'm sorry that that's the answer, but there's some states that have adopted specific like commercial or publisher instruments, and they use those. Some have developed their own. Some states are they're not using the results. They're just saying we're going to require participation in the survey. And that, from a technical standpoint, doesn't provide a lot of differentiation in the model, but that's just an example where they'd say, but the policy interest is just that the schools give the survey and use the results, and evidence that people are participating is really what we care about. So you can see the policy interest there, and that state might even argue that this is working against corrupting the data because nobody's incentivized to kind of run up the score on these surveys. There are other states that do use the results. They'll have more favorable accountability influence for more favorable climate and survey outcomes. I know of one state that tried to split the difference between the two and just put a threshold of performance. They said, we don't pay attention to performance that's above the threshold to keep from the kind of running up the score piece. But if you're below the threshold, we think that signals that some supports are needed and that we want to flag that. And so there's sort of a middle ground there. So yeah, state developed, commercial developed, using results, not using results, only using participation, or using results in a modest way are all different ways we've seen states approach this. And some states have these instruments and just don't put them in their accountability system. They just say, we're going to tell you what we know about how you can get this good information and encourage you to use it, but it doesn't contribute to a letter grade or to a CSI classification. Well, I think my time has come to a close. Paulo and colleagues, I think I'll turn it back over to you to close this out, if you agree.
Great. Thank you so much. I ever so appreciated the robust conversation, the great exchanges in the chat that delved into the whole notion of school improvement and what does that look like? Because again, they're all sort of tied together. Chris, to you and your team, thanks so much for an amazing presentation that really provoked a lot of great conversation. Thanks to all of you who attended. I know you had choices about where you could be at this time, and you chose to be with us. And hopefully you're coming away with some good information, more knowledgeable maybe about where you started, but also motivated to think about, okay, what more do I need to learn? What more can we be doing in our state? What more can NASBE do to support our conversation? What other opportunities to interact with peers might there be? and how do we continue to explore making improvements, right, in this particular space of the policy arena, in the interest of helping drive improvement in our education system. So again, as you reflect on this session, please send your comments and ideas to NASBE. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next session as well, because hopefully this has given you a flavor of both the kind of issues that we can inform you about, as well as the kind of conversations and provocative ideas and stimulating information that we can provide. So we will provide notices of those additional times and registration opportunities, and look forward to seeing you joining us for those as well. And we will likely hit on these topics at our annual conference in October in San Diego. So we're just about to open registration for that, and we'll make sure each of you understands how that process can take place as well. So with that, thanks so much for taking the time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Keep up the great work you do each and every day. And thanks again to the Center for Assessment for their great presentation.